What is going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Masculine Health Solutions podcast, where I am joined by Brandy Gillmore, who's going to talk to us about healing. And like I said off air, healing is a thing that I'm very much into. I'm not into treating. I'm not into just kind of saying, okay, we're going to give you different things that may work, may not. Healing is where it's at. So we are blessed today in that we have Brandy on to tell us more about what that actually looks like. But first and foremost, Brandy, how are you today?
I am doing fantastic. Thank you. I love your energy. I'm happy to be here.
Hey, thank you. And like I said off air, I love these conversations because I think it's something that needs to be talked about more, especially in this day and age where we're focused on, I think, a little bit too much of the wrong things. And sometimes as humans, we focus too much on the negative. But I think one of the biggest and most important things in regards to your journey is the catalyst. So that's kind of why I want to start the story off with where did this kind of begin for you? And what was it that really sparked this journey?
Depends on what part of the journey you're talking about sparking. I mean, first and foremost, I used to do network engineering and operations, and I had an accident, technically two, a car accident and then like a fall accident where I just fell just wrong, just right, however you want to say it. But I went from living a full life to wheelchair, walker, cane, a complete mess on morphine every day, and my doctor saying that there was nothing they could do for me, and it really changed my entire life.
Jeez. And at that moment, was it kind of like when they said there was nothing that you could do, did you just feel defeated and you just kind of said, you know what, all right, screw it, I'm just gonna be stuck in the wheelchair? Or
It was more so like it was like you ask for another specialist. Well, let me get a second opinion. Well, let me get a 10th opinion. Well, let me go see let me go find this specialist. And so it became a journey of waiting for the next specialist who might be a month out or 2 months out or whatnot. And then just trying to distract my mind. And, at first it was just like watch TV and just make it through the day of just trying to distract and not be sucked into the pain and kind of being like, it's going to be okay. Not an alarmist going, okay, we just got to figure this out. Cause you don't really ever think, oh, I'm going to be in a place where I'm not going to be able to heal for years. It just,
yeah,
it's not something that for me ever really crossed my mind.
which is interesting because you kind of had that thought, which I think kind of plays into that rebellious spirit where you're just kind of like, wait a minute, I'm not gonna be here forever. What was it that kind of gave you light though at the end of the tunnel when you were in that situation after seeing the specialist and you're like, hey, you know what? I don't necessarily want to take their word as gospel. What made you kind of, go in that direction?
It was this. It was I had been going to all of these, trying anything, and started going to this research hospital, and two, three, four doctors would come in and they would come see me and evaluate and then try to come up with a plan. And I was doing, nerve ablations, infusions, lidocaine injections. I mean, all or infusions, all of these things. And finally, I got an opportunity. They got me into this medical study. And I thought,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, like I'm going to get my life back. Because that's what you really hope. You hope
Yeah.
when you're in this spot that somebody's going to invent something new and then you get your life back. That's what I was hoping. And so finally, like I get into this study. I'm counting down the days to like a kid before Christmas, counting down the days till I feel like I'm going to get my life back. Like it's going to change. And so I get into this study, and a long story short, the doctor reevaluates me and says, "You can't be a part of this study. We don't expect you
uh,
to get better." And like I felt like I swallowed a tennis ball. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I was just like in tears. I was just like, okay. Um, and the next morning, I'm laying there in my same bed in all of this pain, and I don't even want to live. I mean, just like, what's the point? I knew I could not live life with this quality of life. I just was like, I was defeated. And then
yeah.
I had this thought or this voice that came into my mind, and it was like, but what about the placebo? And that, no one, I thought, well, I can't give up. If there's some type of hope, if
Hmm.
people can take a fake pill and still get results, because that's, as I went into that research study, that's what I had thought ahead of time. I thought, well, please don't get the placebo. I want the real treatment. And because, I didn't want the fake pill, I wanted the real thing. And so that was the thought that left me was, well, if that does work, then what is it in the mind that does that? And it sent me down like this rabbit hole of saying, well, how does the mind work? And what can I do?
Yeah. What was the first study that you saw in regards to the placebo that kind of really, I guess, solidified? It's almost like you had this thought, but then what made you say, you know what, this kind of confirms what I was already suspecting in regards to the placebo. Was it what was the one study that you're like, okay, wait, I think there's a real possibility here?
You know, okay, so I was like literally any research that I could find. And I think one thing was this was that there was study after study after study consistently that showed the
Uh,
placebo worked and could produce results. So I think that was number one, but I completely did it wrong in that like I started also reading metaphysical things that said, well, all you have to do is believe you're already healed and be grateful for your healing. And so I did all of that chanting and affirmations and telling myself I was already healed, and it wasn't working. And I was doing it like pro level. I mean, I was so much so I had like multiple realities, and I was still really in a lot of pain and really injured. And so I kept researching, and then I found something called the open label placebo,
mhm.
which is exactly like it sounds, open label. So both the doctor and the patient both know it's fake, and it still works. And I was like, okay, well, now I know it's not all about belief. um,
What?
I know, right? So
I've
then
never heard of
I,
that.
yeah, which is funny. Most people haven't. And the
Yeah.
first open label placebo was something like in the 1960s from researchers from Johns Hopkins. And most people haven't even heard of it. And but there's more and more studies that are always that are being done on it. And then like there was another research study that's more recent than the 60s that was called placebos without deception or something like that. And it's an open label placebo. And both people know it's fake, and it still produces results.
What?
I know. And so I started looking at, okay, well, what are the rest of the anomalies? Instead of avoiding these things, I said, okay, well, what else is going on? And I think just another thing that blew my mind was that people with multiple personality disorder
Hmm.
could have different ailments in different personalities, right? You've heard of that,
Yeah, I've
right?
heard of that. Yeah, yeah.
And when I saw that, it was profound for a couple reasons. One was that the same personality always had the same illness.
Hmm.
Meaning that, if somebody was Bob normally in their host personality, but then when they're James, they have like high blood pressure and
Hmm.
asthma. But then if they're Bob, they might have headaches and back pain. And it was consistent and not like, just made up. I mean, it's things like body temperature, pulse, blood pressure. And so it was looking at all these things, and I thought, the fact that illness was consistent with the mindset was just really profound.
Yeah, because I remember hearing about that just recently. I can't remember where it was that I was kind of doing some, I don't know, I kind of geek out and stuff every now and again, right? And it was I forgot he had like a fractured personality where he had over 21, if I'm not mistaken. And one of them, I think 18 of the personalities or 20 of them were all super allergic to orange juice. And if he ever had orange juice, he would have the worst allergic reactions. But there was one personality that he'd be in, and for whatever reason, he could have all the orange juice he wanted, and he loved orange juice. And that's what kind of blew my mind because I'm like, how does that make any sense? Like, what are we talking about here? And even I forgot there's another one too where a guy had a birthmark that would literally appear when he was a certain person. And I'm like, how is that even possible? And the fact that you stumbled across this to me just kind of confirms the fact that, yeah, there's power in the mind, I guess.
Exactly. And there's a well-known study of a woman who was medically blind in some personalities, but not others. And so it was just looking at it. They're not faking it, but brain scans and all of these things. And when you stop and look at it, you go, wait a second, then what is going on? And so what was interesting is that everything, as I was looking for healing and everybody's saying,
Mhm.
you're not going to get better. There's nothing we can do. The more I looked at the mind from the placebo to the open label placebo to stress even affecting the
Mhm.
physical body. And that's so well known with psychoneuroimmunology, and then, multiple personalities. Everything was pointing to the mind. And something else that was really profound was also the awareness that our bodies are constantly repairing and replacing cells. I
Mhm.
mean, our blood cells, even our bones are,
Yeah.
science estimates we have about a whole new skeleton every 10 years. And I thought, well, how is it possible for somebody to then have that old football injury from
Mhm.
high school if the body's constantly repairing and replacing cells? So that just everything kept pointing at the mind.
Yeah. And again, it's kind of like And I remember I had another guy who was on talking about how like stores energy in the body and how you can actually deal with certain energies. And sometimes it has to do with the stories that we tell ourselves as well, which kind of just allows those manifestations to continue because it's like, oh, I am Conrad. I always have, lower back pain because of that one injury that I had 10 years ago. Oh, look, there it is. I'm confirming that it exists, right? And it kind of goes back to the whole personality situation. Obviously, people with personality disorders are a little bit different, but for a lot of people, it's almost intertwined into who they are now. So they're like, oh, I can't do XYZ because, back in the day, I had this knee pain. Let me tell you all about it. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that knee injury you had like 20 years ago, right? Tell me more. So it's kind of like
Exactly.
confirming. Yeah.
Exactly. So when I have kind of a different philosophy that I don't see that traumas are stored in the body. To me,
Mhm.
it seems physically impossible because we're always repairing and replacing cells.
Interesting.
And people with multiple personality disorder shift in and out of it. Not
Mm.
only that, but even like when I was injured, I could have good days and bad days. And it feels like if it's just stored in my body, then it's just there, And so I think it's the nervous system is kind of the way I see it.
Gotcha.
Um,
Yeah.
is that it, I know kind of the way that I started looking at it during my injury is I started looking at it like in an analogy with like an emotional brain injury, if you will. And a simple way to think about it is kind of like a stroke. If somebody has a stroke on the right side of their brain, it can paralyze the left side of their body, or they have one on the left side, it
Right
can
side.
paralyze the right side of their body. And so I kind of started looking at it as though where are emotions showing up in the brain and what are they then impacting in the mind brain body connection, and looking at it in that way. And some people might say, well, emotions can't really create that impact, but brain scans have shown that PTSD, or even stress from a car accident,
Mhm.
can actually change the shape of our brain. And so that's how I started looking at it, is kind of like understanding the brain body connection, and yeah, that emotions are so much more powerful than we realize.
Yeah, and it's true because I mean, the central nervous system, like its job is to, obviously as humans, it's kind of like you got to protect you, we got to run, we got to stay put, you got to freeze. It's in charge of so many different things, and sending those signals actually releases, I mean, the hormones, everything's connected, right? So it's kind of like, send
Mhm.
signals to the brain, brain's like, oh, snap, adrenaline, release. Or cortisol right through the body, and it's like I can't lose weight. I'm like, yeah, you're stressed out, and it's these connections and correlations that we do find over time. I mean, to your point, you studied all these different subjects, so you're extremely well versed in it, right? And you know that the brain is going to release it just because it's like it's picking all that stuff up, and the central nervous system is kind of in charge of all that, which is, I think that's a very interesting insight because yeah, I never looked at it from that perspective, but it makes perfect sense.
This, right? This is something that was fascinating also, is that there were researchers who created what's called the homunculus map, which is
Interesting.
like a map of where different parts of the body are in the brain. So like the foot can be here and the head can be here, and the hands can be here. And what was fascinating is how they did it. Is they would stimulate different parts of the brain and see where it showed up in different parts of the body. So they could stimulate like the insular cortex, and somebody could feel nausea or like they wanted to vomit.
Yeah.
And it's like stimulating different parts. And so that was one way I started looking at it, was, just the awareness that different emotional activity in the brain could impact different parts of the brain that could then affect the corresponding part of the body.
Wow. And I mean, going back to your story then, when you were in the wheelchair and that, like, what was the first experiment you kind of ran on yourself, I guess? Because now you got the information, you've learned all these different things. What was like the first, I don't know, I guess open label placebo that you kind of said, hey, I'm gonna try this out. Like, what was that first, what did that like first bit of experimentation kind of look like?
I did a lot of like the visualization. So I was studying everything from quantum physics to neuroscience to metaphysics to everything in between, food, diet. So, I mean, literally, I didn't care where the answer came from. I just wanted to heal.
Yeah.
And so I was doing things like meditation and affirmations and binaural beats and frequencies and phantom phase frequencies, and I mean theta state and delta. I mean, I was literally doing that for hours and hours and hours, hours per day. And while at times it could get my pain down, it didn't heal my body. And
Mhm.
and so I would say I had this pivotal moment that was profound for me. And one of my friends, her aunt was passing from lung cancer, and she asked me if I wanted to go say goodbye. And of course I said, yes. And so she came and picked me up and she took me over to her aunt's house. And, and so in this situation, I felt this, of course, sadness that this beautiful being was passing. And also she had been in hospice, in and out of hospice for several months, or in hospice, but just in and out of consciousness for several months. And as I said goodbye, it also just kind of struck me for a moment that in some ways I probably looked a lot like she did. I mean, I had lost so much weight, and I was spending my entire day meditating and in and out of consciousness and trying to be in this deep state of like hypnosis and listening to guided meditations and doing all these things. But if that was so healing, then why isn't she healed? Why wasn't she, and so it was,
Yeah.
it made me think, okay, I have to do something radically different. And what I did was this, is I said, all right, I have to, this deep state of relaxation, while it can be nice, uh, isn't doing the trick. And I said, okay, how do I change this to really just start getting real results? And so I
Mhm.
simplified everything and I said, okay, let's see if I said, okay, how can I see that the mind affects the body? And I said, okay, well, if somebody's embarrassed, their face turns red,
Mhm.
or panic attack, racing heart, shortness of breath, or even sexual thought, sexual physical response, different for men or women, but there's a physical response. And of course, in my situation, I thought, I'm going to need a lot more than emotions. I mean, I'm a mess. And then I started looking at, well, how much can emotions really affect the physical body? And I could see things like broken heart syndrome, where a person could actually
Wow.
die from a broken heart,
Yep.
or scared to death. A person could die. You've heard of that, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
and
Stock
so I
market
thought,
crash.
there you go. But let's hopefully everybody survives the stock market crash.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I started looking at this and thinking, well, there's serious things that are shown here. In fact, Harvard even recently, there was research that suggested that autoimmune conditions are caused by stress. And so we can see all of these different things. And so basically what I started looking at is I said, okay, well, we can see, embarrassment or panic attack or sexual thought, they all have a different, distinct way of affecting the body. And I
Mhm.
thought, well, okay, what about all the other emotions? What about guilt? What about shame? What about abandonment, self-criticism? What are they doing that we don't know they're doing? And yeah, so then I started looking at that, and then looking at the subconscious mind, and unraveling, and kind of exploring down that path.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, you're 100% correct, because it's always kind of everything that we do is led by thought. I remember somebody was talking about this in regards to philosophy, where it's like Rome started off in somebody's mind. It's like, and just sit there with that thought. I'm like, holy shit, that's true. Like, somebody had to think it up. And then we basically brought that from, like, let's say, the quantum realm into reality, because somebody had to think this into existence. And again, these thoughts, whoever it was that started off, you got more people involved with this thinking process, and they come together. You have these emotions, you're fired up, you feel good, that leads to action. Or obviously, like we were talking about before, and the reason why I brought up the stock market crash was I think it was the first depression back in the 30s, if I'm not mistaken. It was 1932. I can't remember. But anyways, it crashed, and there was a broker who was there, and he literally he gave himself like a panic induced heart attack, because he lost everything. And I was like blown away. I'm like, I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've heard of people also in the news where I can't remember, it was a few years back, there was some type of, violent thing that happened in the news, and the guy's wife died and he died like the next day. And
Yeah.
we've seen situations where, broken heart syndrome, somebody loses a spouse or a loved one, and the next day they pass. And it's, or even, the widowhood effect is also very well known, where a senior can lose a spouse and has a much
Hmm.
higher chance of death afterwards. And it's, it's like we look at emotions and we say, they're they're not that impactful. At least that was me. And of course my injury was now over 20 years ago. And so, or my accident was over 20 years ago. And so to me, I didn't see how my mind could impact my physical body. But I think other things that were really profound is that even studies after surgery have shown that if a person is optimistic, that they heal much faster and they have much better success rates. And if a person is in fear or anger or stress, then they have much slower healing, a lot higher complications, and all of that. And so when we start to look at it, we can see that it shows up. Now, something that was also really profound to me was this, is I could also look at it objectively and say, okay, but there are people who have PTSD, who have huge amounts of stress or trauma, who aren't sick. And there are others who have less stress and they seemingly less stress, and then they're terminal or they have some type of major illness. And so I was like, well, wait a second, let me just look at this objectively. And what I began to figure out is that it's about like the combination or recipe of emotions. And a simple way to think about it is like this, is the analogy I always use is that if you want to make cake and you have flour, you can't make cake. But if you mix it with eggs and butter, vegan eggs and butter and other ingredients, now you can make cake. And if you have different ingredients, you make a different recipe. And that's kind of how I see people with multiple personality disorder. The reason they can have one personality that has a certain illness and a different personality has other illnesses, and then a different personality who can be completely healthy, is it depends on which emotional ingredients, if you will, are in the mind.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of, when it comes to humans, I mean, we don't think linear, we're never really static. We're always in that variable mode where it's like, all right, I woke up feeling like this. Now I feel great. Now I feel awful. Had this, and we're kind of just jumping all over the place. And that's kind of why that recipe, in order for it to work. So when it came to you kind of creating that recipe for yourself, what did you realize that you had to take out? Or is it, I'm guessing it's always going to be different to the person, to the individual, right?
Yes and no. It's kind of like, embarrassment, generally speaking, affects us all kind of the same. And even emojis know that with a little blushing face. And so we can see that there's a similarity. And so I would say there is a similarity in the way it impacts us. And I would say this, I would say that for me personally, the event, if you will, had to do with 9/11. Now, I say this carefully because technically the pattern started at a very young age in my childhood. And so a lot of times that's a mistake that people will make with mind body healing, is that they're trying to look for the trauma. But usually when a trauma happens, it's part of a bigger pattern. And a way to kind of illustrate that is if you think about somebody who maybe has a pattern of feeling rejection. And they might feel rejected in small little ways throughout their life, but then suddenly they feel like maybe their dad abandoned them or a spouse abandoned them, and that becomes a traumatic event. But they may feel it little other ways throughout their life. And so typically what happens is that there might be a major event that causes it. So in my own life, that's what I had. I had like a pattern of expecting to die and also wanting to die, like wanting to die to save others. And then also I had this pattern of guilt, like being guilty meant you were a good person with a conscience. And so I felt guilt for anything. And even after 9/11, I felt survivor's guilt. I felt guilty for surviving. And so it was, and I was not even in New York at the time. So, I mean, I was on the phone with people. So I mentioned I worked in network engineering and
Yeah.
operations. And so I had colleagues that I was on the phone with that when the towers got hit, they were like, help me, help me, help me. And then the phone went dead. And so, but and if you had asked me if that traumatized me, I would have said no. Like all I wanted to do was be able to help others. And here I am in California, not even near any of it. And that's what got locked into my mind.
Interesting. Because it's almost, you're right. It's a collection of different things, but I do think that when we're kids, we kind of come up with our algorithm for our lives, right? And it's almost like we decide at that young age, unfortunately, depending on who you ask and how good your childhood is. But, at that time, we're young and impressionable, and these things really make a difference into our personalities, right? And I think
Mhm.
a lot of the times, if you have a collection of like traumatic events, unfortunately, that kind of happened at that time, it kind of helps to really, I guess, fine tune your psyche to view the world from a very, I guess, limited perspective. And as you get older, you're able to mature, and certain things you're kind of able to let go of. However, I kind of feel like that algorithm has just kind of been set up. And then now I think as adults, it's our job to kind of fine tune it even more and be like, all right, this we can, just get rid of that. This we can bring back up. All right, nobody's trying to kill you. And just kind of go from there, right?
I love the way you've so wisely described it, and to your point, there's something that I call emotion controlled consciousness. So where you said it kind of limits your perception and all of that.
Yeah.
Um, there's so kind of like if we simplify it and we think about somebody who's really, really, really in love, what do they see? They see all of the good in the person.
Hmm.
And yet if they're really pissed off, they see what? They see all of the
Absolute worst.
negative. Right? If they've had an argument, they can't go help but go back and think about that and like go over it. And the point being is that our emotions control our consciousness. So even if we're really pissed off and upset at the person, we go, okay, well, I'm going to stop thinking about that, or I'm just going to think positive. It feels hard to do
Hmm.
because our emotions control our consciousness without us really realizing it. Or when we don't say to ourselves, oh, I'm really in love, so I'm only going to see the good in this person. Like our minds do it automatically without us realizing it.
Hmm.
And so all of these subconscious emotions like fear or anger or hurt or abandonment, all of these things also are running at our subconscious mind. And so when we end up in this type of pattern, it perpetuates without us realizing. And I guess kind of like a simple way to illustrate this is if we picture somebody who has had a pattern of like abandonment, what could happen is in a relationship, then they might be really, really, really needy. In which case, the other person is like, "Oh, I'm suffocated," and it then results again in abandonment. Or they could have a pattern of abandonment, and then they don't want to be abandoned again. So then they're like hot and cold, or they're really distant. In which case, they never really create a bond, and the other person's like, "Okay, well, bye." And so it ends up. It's like these subconscious patterns then shape our actions and shape our perception, and so then we end up repeating the pattern and then these emotions unbeknownst to us are then connected somewhere invisibly in our health and to our health and we don't realize it.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like the mind body connection. And that's where I think when holistic health had kind of become a thing, back when I was becoming a personal trainer, which is like going back 15 years ago now, like at that time, like people were preaching a lot about holistic health, but nobody was really talking about the mental or spiritual kind of side of things. They're just like, ah, yeah, it's kind of a part of it, eat some greens. Nobody really had anything on it, right? And I feel like a lot of people were missing out on it. They're just, they said like, have a healthy diet, make sure you work out and, get oxygen, eat healthy kind of thing. But now it's kind of like we're really looking into the integration of how that truly affects the psyche, right? Like it affects, I mean,
Oh,
psyche affects the body, which affects everything else. And I find that, you know, as we are evolving as humans, like I think we're really looking for healing now. We're not looking for, like I mentioned before, we're not looking to just treat an ailment. It's like, how do we actually take care of these different ailments that are affecting us? And to your point, it's kind of like, man, I mean, to go from a cane to like being in a wheelchair to actually getting out, and like that's massive, you know?
my God. Okay, so I have to share this with you. So when I started getting better and I started figuring out how to get my pain down and my body's starting to feel better, I was like, okay, I'm going to go to the gym. Right. And so what I started doing, because movement still, I was still figuring it all out. So I would go to the gym and I would just like kind of hold weight for a minute. Right. And
Hmm.
then I would leave. So I was at the gym, like just minutes. And these bodybuilders at the gym, there was this other thing that I was trying. And so I was trying to bike, to pedal on the bike. And I didn't exactly know how to use all the equipment because I had done like martial arts growing up. So I was not like the gym person typically. So I get in
Hmm.
there and I get on the first bike and it's broken. The lights don't come on. And then I get on a second one, which takes me a while. I got my cane and or walker, whatever it was at that time. And I get on the next one. It's broken too. The lights don't come on. And I get to the third one. And I realize I just can't pedal fast enough to get the lights to come on. So it kind of became a bit of a joke, but then these bodybuilders that I met there, and these and personal trainers and whatnot, it was just, you start to make a family when you work out, when you have a personal trainer and whatnot. So I love that. I didn't know you did that. I love that you do that. But yeah, it just they said, look, we've never seen anybody make the change that you've made, because I literally went from like 5 months from like cane, walker, all of that, to like lifting weights and they were like, you can work out with us anytime. And
Nice.
so I started working out with them, but it's good to have somebody to work out with too. Yeah, it was great.
Definitely kind of inspire you. And that's the thing too. It's like when people, like when I'm at the gym, right? And I'll see I'll see cocky guys. I walk in there and I'm just like, man, you ain't that. It's like you're all that in a bag of chips. And I'm like, I'm not really impressed by you. But I'll see somebody that weighs 300 pounds, probably suffering from anxiety, just getting their ass in there and trying. I'm like, hey man, respect to you, because it's a totally different, it's a different ball game. And it's kind of, when you approach it with humility, people are usually like, it's part of the human. I think for the most part, most humans are just kind of like, hey, you know what? Like, you need a helping hand, I'll definitely help you out. However, if you're going to sit there and talk on the machines and be on your phone, like a lot of the kids on TikTok, then they're just like, okay, hurry up, get out of the way. It's very
No.
different in that sense.
Oh yeah, but to your, like, to what you do, which is really great. Just the more you learn how to exercise, the easier it is, the more effective it is, the better. It's just, yeah. So it's and of course, getting back my strength, that was something. I mean, I was down to 93 pounds, and I'm almost between 5'8", 5'9". So
Wow.
I went from a size 4 to a size bones,
Wow.
and I was, yeah, I was a mess, and so yeah, so just and then yeah, as I started feeling better, just working out was also just getting my strength back was a big part of just beautiful helping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, well, obviously I got the pictures here of you just looking jacked with abs and everything. So I guess it worked, but
Right. I went through this phase. I was like, people would call me up and say, hey, what are you doing? I said, I'm at the gym. If you want to see me, I just, all I wanted to do was just get my life back. It was
yeah.
just laser focused mindset, working on mindset. Then I will go work out. And I was like working on how to run again, which was another tricky thing,
Yeah.
So part of what I did with running again, I had the friend of mine at the time. I said, okay, I want you to run. And we went to like the elementary school. So I had like a little area to just be and do and grass and whatnot. And so I would watch her. I said, okay, well, I just want to watch you. And then I would watch her run and I'd say, okay. And then I would try to do it. And then I'd say, okay, wait, do it again. And so I'd have her do it. And so I could kind of get an idea of, okay. And then I got it and I got to running. And then I was like, oh, shoot, I don't know how to stop. And so that's
Wow.
something else you have to think about. Just
Wow. Yeah.
so it was silliness, but it was, I mean, it was crying, laughing in a beautiful way, just coming back to life.
Yeah.
I was
Well, I
just doing the
mean,
thing.
there's a lot of things that we take for granted, but the mind and the central nervous system is in charge of these things. And one of those things is walking. Like I forgot, there was a dude who was talking about how, like, I think he was paralyzed or something, had a stroke. And then the part of his brain that was actually in charge of his ability to walk almost got shut down. And he's like, think about, like, when you walk, you don't think, right? And he's like, I have to think about every step that I take, how I like move my body and my weight through space and time, right? And it's something that we take for granted. So to your point, learning how to run again, I've talked to physiotherapists, they're like, it's not uncommon, and it's like learning how to stop, jump, all these different things kind of play into it. But
Oh, it's so odd. It's so odd. Like, go ahead. But
yeah, no, I was just gonna say it's like we take it for granted, but it's, I guess in your case, it was just kind of coming back and just that whole journey of like bringing back the mind and body. But the one thing that I wanted to ask you about was like the mindset work that you had mentioned before and getting the emotions right. What did that kind of look like, together with the actual exercise in that time? Like, was it just progression? Like, how were you feeling emotionally? Was it like, okay, I went from like happy, super happy to like max happiness? Like, I don't know, like what did that kind of look like?
yeah, like, in some ways So I would say this. So first and foremost, after that whole instance where my friend's aunt was passing and I was like, okay, I have to do something different. There was just different insights. And what I started to realize was I thought, okay, I need positive new neural pathways that are just going to be positive, because the problem with positive thinking, or thinking positive, is you have to think. It takes effort.
Hmm.
And not only that, but the brain works with neural pathways, it works with patterns. And so I thought, well, I need to create positive patterns and I need positive neural pathways. And so I really started working on doing that, on creating new positive neural pathways. And one simple thing that I did, which was simple but profound, was I picked two songs and I started listening to just these two songs. And of course, I would listen to other music. And I had been, by the way, prior to this, my house sounded like an ashram and it was trying all the relaxation and all this stuff. And it wasn't working. I was like, okay, I have to change this up. So I started basically programming my mind using music. Now, sometimes when I say this, people immediately think, oh, a happy playlist. And I say, no, that's not it. Okay,
Not exactly.
so it's kind of like this. So if we think about creating a neural pathway, if we just think positive about everything, it's
Hmm.
like trying to just force yourself to go through a field of grass a different way every day. But if we think about going through a field of grass the same way over and over and over and over and over again, the same exact way, now what do? We create a path.
Hmm.
So similar, like when we go to learn the alphabet, how do we learn the alphabet? We do it over and over and over and over again, and then we know the alphabet. Now, if we just did a different alphabet every day of, oh, this is German, oh, this is French, oh, this is Mandarin, oh, this is blah, 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 we would never learn any of, like, if we weren't consistent with anything, we'd never learn it. And
Yeah.
so instead of just saying, oh, I want to just be happy and positive, I said, okay, well, let me program in different ways of feeling. So that was one part of it, was picking, and the songs that I picked, one of them was U2, Beautiful Day. And the other one was Walking on Sunshine by Katrina and the Waves, right? Now, the reason that I picked these is also thinking about emotion controlled consciousness. So thinking about, I didn't just need to rewire my mind. Yes, I needed to do that, but I needed to have a radical emotional shift. So it's like somebody going from feeling angry to feeling in love. And I'm like going, okay, well, if I need to create a strong emotional shift, how am I going to do that? And so I used music. And the reason it's simple but profound is this, is that just like the alphabet, we do it multiple times, and after a while we learn it and we have it.
Hmm.
For me to have somehow accessed feelings of happiness and feeling elated every day over and over and over and over again would have been impossible. And so basically what I did is I used music to kind of help the process. To basically, I would play the song, like Walking on Sunshine is like this upbeat song that's like, yay. And so I would literally set everything aside and I would just listen to these songs and just purposely try to bliss out to them as much as I possibly could. And so it, as silly as it may sound, or as simple as it may sound, it helped with a few really important things. One is the consciousness that I mentioned. It helped to
Hmm.
shift consciousness. Another one created neural pathways because I did it over and over and over and over again. So the repetition, it started to create a different feeling. And the way to kind of think about that feeling is to think about, if something great just happened in your life and you start to feel a bit more happy about things, or, somebody gets engaged and they're feeling really happy, or a new job, whatever it is,
Hmm.
you start to feel like something great just happened, even though nothing necessarily great just happened. But when you bliss out like that and you put it in, and then you also, when you're doing it, research has even shown that as you create a feeling of euphoria with music, it can also help release dopamine. So now I'm helping to create positive biochemistry that's in my body. So I just did this multiple times a day to start amplifying everything and bringing that in. So that was one piece, and there were multiple things. I mean, there was there were multiple pieces, but that was one that was pivotal.
Interesting. I mean, I think I've been doing it wrong the whole time because I got like my workout songs that are very angry. I get very angry when I listen to them.
Okay,
You know? But I'll put them on and I kind of feel those emotions, and I'm just like, oh yeah, like ready to lift hard. It's like Slipknot, like heavy metal, right? So I'm like, but that's interesting. But go
But
ahead.
to your point, instead of, because that's the exact thing, is interestingly, anger can actually bring out dopamine also. It can get linked up.
What?
So kind of to your, I know, right? So kind of to the point is this though, is that we can link up positive things to negative experience. For example,
Oh.
we've heard before maybe a cutter who can cut themselves and experience a feeling of relief or euphoria or
Yeah.
control or safety from cutting themselves. Or somebody can link up feelings of pride to hardship. And
Hmm.
so what happens, we can totally link up power to anger, but we could also link up power to feeling elated and just strong. And so there's different links. And so what happens though is that if we do get things like anger linked up to like power, then to feel strong, we have to go into anger all the time. And so
Yeah.
what I would say is, like there's even what's that song? Who's that by? Like I Got That Power. Or there's different
Oh,
songs that
Kanye
are
West, yeah.
like okay. So there's other songs though, even that you can that we could listen to that are just like that can amp you up
Hmm.
and not be angry. You know what I mean? And so it basically helps change the emotional patterns. And another way to put it is this is some people even might have love linked up to sympathy. And
Hmm.
so the way for them to get love is sympathy, and that gets linked up. And so but anyway, but to your point, okay, so I mentioned that I was working on running, and I literally realized that if I listened to a type of music that made that was just amped, I could do better at it as I was working on running and all of that. So yeah,
Yeah.
as you go to the gym, you probably notice a difference when you listen
Oh
to
yeah.
music, right?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Okay, so I'm going to invite you to maybe think about some powerful, energetic songs that are happy also, because
Yeah.
it fuels you. And I would say this, I would say that, you know, for me to create that change, I picked two songs, but I also had other happy songs too.
Mhm.
It's just also thinking about creating neural pathways. And so
Yeah.
it's kind of like if there's something that you're working on. So another way you could think about it is memorizing a speech every day. It's not like if we're memorizing a speech every day, we could go over it and over it and over it to memorize some type of speech or something like that. That doesn't mean we have to stop talking in the rest of our day. We can keep talking throughout our day, but we still need to do the speech on repeat to memorize it. And so with
Yeah.
music, we can listen to all kinds of happy, positive music, and I definitely recommend it. But if we're working on like saying, okay, let me establish a new positive neural pathway, we pick one or two songs, amplify it, get those in, and then move on to others. That's a simple hack that was
Interesting.
profound.
Yeah, because I mean, to your point, obviously I've only done it with anger, but it's kind of like making that mental shift makes perfect sense because how am I going to heal if I'm in a negative place, right? And you're feeling low emotionally. Whereas like this, I kind of see it. It's almost like it's almost like a paradigm shift, right? It's almost like you go from that negative to all of a sudden, boom, like, you know what, I feel pretty good. And it's kind of like those anchors that you set up for yourself, which are now the precursor to you almost creating the environment that you want or that you need for healing or anything else, right?
Absolutely. And what's funny and what to your point, it does, it's a paradigm shift. And as I was doing this, as odd as it may sound, it's like the world, I could see the world being happier. Like people, I would notice people being happier. The sky looked bluer, the trees looked greener, the birds like oddly, you know, it's like I could see more of the world. I guess when you have all this chaos and stress and fear, and you miss everything that's there. And even I had this point when I got better, that I went downtown and downtown actually in Northern California in Sacramento, and I was walking around and I was just looking at the tall buildings and I was just bawling, just crying. It was just me. I went by myself. I drove, like it was all like it just was. And I called a friend at the time. I was like, oh my God. I was just, and all I wanted to do was just go walk downtown and look at the buildings. And I watched like people, at lunchtime pour out of the buildings. And it was just like feeling part of life again. And it was just this beautiful moment that still brings tears to my eyes. Just so beautiful. But point being is the paradigm shift of everything that was already there. I just could see it and feel it and experience it all in such a more beautiful way.
Which is super interesting because it's like we choose, whether you believe in simulation theory, like a lot of people kind of bring up, and this, that, and the other. It's almost like the paradigm that we choose is the one that we choose. So it's like you can live in a beautiful, blissful world, or you can choose for it to be absolute mayhem and shit. Like it's ultimately up to the person, right? And
Yeah.
one thing that I guess like I wanted to get to, but running out of time. I was like, if I could keep you here for another hour, but one thing that I wanted to ask you about is the people that you're working with now, because I imagine a lot of them are kind of in that, small box kind of mindset. Like, how do you go about working with them and how do you go about changing them? How do you like, what does that process kind of look like?
Absolutely. A lot of people that I work with have actually been looking for healing for a long time, like 30,
Mhm.
40 years. Some people are newer to it. It's kind of all over the place, um, but I would say a lot of people have been on this journey for years trying to figure it out. And what I really want people to do is just that feeling of empowerment, is understand that we all have this ability. And the more we know we have this ability, the more we can wake up to this paradigm shift. And the way I see it is kind of like this, is that imagine if people are walking around with and they're having a panic attack and they
Mhm.
have no idea that emotions are attached to it. So they go, well, run a test on my heart. It's beating, it's racing really fast. Oh my gosh, my lungs, I can't breathe. What's going on? And they have no idea that it's attached to anxiety. And so we have all of these emotions that are hidden that are affecting us, pain, illness. I mean, research has shown that stress affects cancer,
Mhm.
negative emotions affects autoimmune, stress affects seeing. So we've literally shown this over and over, and it's just about using this information and changing it. And so what I love to do is I love to empower people. I love to, that's why I have my book. It's
Yeah.
showing people how to do it themselves. And I feel like the more people wake up to this awareness that these emotions that we have subconsciously are actually doing something in our bodies, they're not just negative emotions,
Mhm.
but they're actually impacting us, the better. And I'd say, so a lot of what I've been doing these days is, working on my book, showing it under medical equipment. I love for people to see the changes under medical equipment. So
Yeah.
that's something. And I don't know, have you seen the scans?
Oh yeah, I got it right here. I'm looking at the neck pain. I'm just like, yep, that just disappeared. It's like, how do you explain that? You can't really deny it at that point. And that's kind of why I think I've always been a big believer in that we should be healing, not treating, right? And that's kind of, and we're all looking for solutions. So if we can actually heal and find a real way to do that in real time, and like again, I'm looking at this scan and I'm like, yeah, you can't deny that. That's right there in your face. So if it's right there, the possibility exists. Why aren't we exploring this more as a society? Is my whole thing. Is like we need to. Like people are out there suffering, they're in pain. We need healing more than ever.
Yeah, I would say this for me, because it feels like this. It feels like because everybody's downplayed emotions, medical community doesn't say, "Oh my gosh, emotions, they're important." They instead say, "Oh my God, this pill, it's important." And so it's been a practice. We've all been, it's like if something's on fire and we've all been trained to just sit there next to it instead of actually do something. And
Yeah.
so emotions, we've all have this perception that emotions are going on and it's cool, like just chill. Like, and not only that, but then like antidepressants came out and whatnot. So we were further trained as a society that if we have depression, we can't do anything about it. It's a chemical thing. We can't control our own minds. And so I would say it's, even in my own life, I was raised with kind of the theme of, leave your emotions at the door. And if you have
Yeah.
emotions, you're weak. And so I didn't even think I had emotions. That would have made me weak. And so,
It's like, no, it's like makes you human, but
yeah, but at the time I was like, and so I would say it's that. I'd say the more that we wake up and realize that our emotions impact us, that's what I'd love to see. And so that's what a lot of what I've been working on. And to kind of describe the image so everybody has an idea, what I've used is medical thermal imaging.
Mhm.
And a simple way to think about medical thermal imaging is that it picks up on the heat from the body. And a way to think about it is, let's say if somebody has a sprained ankle or an infection, as we know, it generates heat. And so medical thermal imaging can detect this heat at a very advanced level. And so let's say somebody has neck pain. What I've been able to do is I've worked with various doctors. Dr. Hilary Smith was the first one who I worked with. And I had her scan people under medical thermal imaging. And let's say that when they have neck pain, it's all red on the scan. So over the neck, the whole neck is red. And then I'll show somebody how to use their mind to release the pain. And you literally see the scan turn from red to green as the pain goes away in minutes. And you can see that happen. And what I love is you can see it's not just mind over matter. It's not pretending. It's not just positive thinking. There's actually physical changes taking place.
Yeah. And that's kind of the biggest thing. It's like the proof is in the pudding. You can't really deny it at that point. And that's sometimes where people will hear this and dismiss it as woo woo or whatever. And I'm like, no, it's like there's something there. There's something here. And even when we opened up with the podcast, we were talking about the power of the mind and in a whole bunch of other ways that have been studied by the medical, different doctors that exist. It's kind of like we know it's there, but we just never really explored how it works. And I think to your point now, we're actually seeing how it works when you involve the mind and get the whole body working as an orchestra instead of just like, you know what, here, take this instrument, see if it helps out. It's like, well, no, because that entire area is still completely messed up, right? So I think to your point, that's why I value this, because I think it's massive. I think it's massive, and I think you're at the cusp of something big. This is going to be changing, because I think a lot of people, like I said before, I think we're at a place where it's almost like a changing of the guard. And I think a lot of people, including myself, that well, maybe 20 years ago, I wouldn't be as open as I am now, where I'm like, okay, there's got to be more out here. What else can we explore? And I think pretty soon, this is going to be a part of our medicine, our modern day medicine, anyways.
Right. I would agree. I would agree more. And to your point, the Surgeon General actually released a statement last year saying loneliness is detrimental to our health. And so
Wow.
that was actually something good that came out of COVID, and not good, but an awareness where so many people were disconnected. It was clear as day that loneliness was impactful, and the medical community could see it, and reports came from that. And of course, obviously it was not a good thing, but at least there's some type of progress that's coming out of this, because more and more people are waking up and saying, oh, you know what, stress does actually impact the body more than we think. And so that's what's exciting.
Yeah, 100%. But before you take off today, Brandy, tell us more about where we can find you. Tell us more about your courses, healing, all that good stuff.
Absolutely. So my book, you can find it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or anywhere that books are sold. And my website is brandygillmore.com, and Gillmore has 2 L's. And on it, what is fun is that the thermography that I mentioned, there is a video called See Live Healing, where you can actually see somebody using their own mind under medical equipment, and you can see the changes real time. And that's fun, I think.
I think it's awesome. Yeah, I got it open right here. I'm like, yeah, I was looking at it, just geeking out on all this stuff before. No, but thank you so much for coming on the podcast again, guys. All the links are always going to be in description. Love this time. I love this. I love learning more about this. And Brandy, I really commend you for your work, and I'm just super thankful for having you on today.
Thank you so much, CJ. I'm super thankful for being here, and I love your energy, and I love your smile and your glow. You're beautiful inside and out. So thank you.
Hey, thank you. Until the next episode, guys, we'll see you then.